these recommendations through the consultation that the ENA did earlier in the year. And the feedback that came back was quite positive and really supportive of the work we're doing. But some of the key messaging that came out was that we've got to ensure that there's oversight from the ENA of the work that DNOs are doing towards moving towards closer to real-time procurement, and that there's visibility to stakeholders, and that DNOs should really move together as well and set out their progress collectively to make sure that no DNO falls behind. So we took this feedback, and we had to think about how we can provide this transparency and oversight, and make sure that we're putting the information out to stakeholders. And we've identified that it will fall across two key areas. So reporting through the ENA's Open Networks P0 product common framework, and specifically there will be an inclusion of DNO's progress towards this within its annual reporting, which I think comes out sort of in the new year, the next annual report from P0, so January, February time. And also, DNOs already do a lot of interaction, engagement with stakeholders through their existing processes, through their C31E, which is part of an Ofgem regulated process that ensures that DNOs are giving transparency on their procurement and activities around flexibility throughout the year. And then again, the consultation that the ENA runs annually with their stakeholders will also include an update through that as well. So if you just go to the next slide for me, please. So this gives sort of a snapshot really of the detail that we're planning on putting into the P0 product in that report that will be published early next year. So again, picking out sort of those key development areas, what we're calling key indicators across those as well. So sort of the product design, the settlement mechanics, again a look at market liquidity there in engagement as well, and also that relevant knowledge sharing across industry. So that's the sort of proposal high level of what we're planning including in that annual update. And we have actually, as we are near the end of 2022, we have actually completed a key indicators report across DNOs, which will be included in the P0 report that's due out next year. I think we'll probably potentially publish a view of that earlier, the sort of the summary of the work that's been done around this. And just to give a bit of a view of the timeline there, so that sort of consultation timeline that I talked around through our C31E process and the ENA's own consultation process, and how that sort of the timings of that throughout the year. So that sort of starts in April with DNOs publishing their flexibility procurement statements, and then there's consultation that happens through the Open Networks project. DNOs then have an opportunity to consolidate that both through Open Networks and through their own C31E process, and that goes on to inform what goes into their next flexibility procurement statement, and that statement should include from DNOs any work or changes or proposals that they're going to make to their procurement processes. So if they are making changes or progress towards steps towards real-time procurement, it should be visible within that procurement statement. Okay, so that's sort of the summary of what we've done for the steps towards real-time procurement and the actions that have come from that deliverable. And I'm going to move on now and talk about the recommendations for pre-qualification alignment. So hopefully on your screen, if you've moved to the next slide, you've got the 4 recommendations that came out of the work that we did earlier in the year in the P2 product team. So we did an assessment of every DNO's approach towards pre-qualification and the ESO's approach towards pre-qualification, looked at all the criteria that we're using, the processes that we're using to pre-qualify, both commercially and technically, providers into our flexibility markets. We did conclude that there was differences. Some DNOs were quite light on the amount of purification, some a little heavier. But the recommendations that have come out is that we should be looking to standardise those processes where possible, both from the technical and commercial aspects of what we do for pre-qualification, and we should do that in collaboration with the ESO, and where possible look to collaborate with wider market platforms, so third-party platforms that may offer this as a service on behalf of network operators. We also recommended that we prioritise the alignment of technical qualifications, so around the asset qualification. That tends to be the more onerous process. We require providers to do that on a much more regular basis. So commercial qualification tends to happen up front and once on a company, sort of a company level, and the technical can happen a lot more frequently, and there's a lot more parameters around technical qualification as well. So we saw that it would be the greatest benefit of the market if we sort of prioritise that first, but we did also identify some sort of quick win, low effort alignment around the commercial as well, that we can prioritise in order to sort of seek as much alignment as possible around commercial qualification. And that last one there, you know, that those standardised templates, we're really looking for a common layer of the data that we're looking to collect as part of qualification, but that sort of common data layer should be really agnostic, and it could be done manually through API and sort of an upload, and it's not a form that every provider needs to use. It's just that sort of that common layer of data that DNOs and the ESO could use. So if we move to the next slide, so we've got a timeline of implementation and how we propose to implement these recommendations, and the proposal is that we take this forward through Open Networks next year through 2023, and it'd be one of the key deliverables of the P2 procurement processes product through 2023. So I won't walk through this in full detail, but we've got a bit of preparatory work from DNOs at the beginning of the year, looking to again review parameters that we're currently using, and then we're proposing in April to hold a stakeholder workshop with interested stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, so providers, those third-party representatives from those third-party marketplaces and other stakeholders, so that we can really work together to agree what these this standard data layer for technical pre-qualification is. And then there's a little bit of work later in the year to again look at those quick win, low effort commercial parameters that I mentioned, and we'll have a second workshop to really finalise those technical parameters and agree the commercial parameters, at which point we'll take that out for consultation again through the ENA's annual consultation process for Open Networks. So hopefully by the end of 2023 we'll have that sort of agreement on this commonality, and we'll be able to move that forward for implementation across DNOs. We'll also be able to move it to some sort of governance arrangements in the future as well, so that it can continue to have that sort of oversight. If we just go on to the next slide, I've just got a bit more detail around the sort of stakeholder engagement that we want to do in that future governance. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, as I said, we're planning to hold 2 focus workshops with stakeholders. So that would include flexibility service providers, platform operators, relevant industry bodies such as the ADE, with an objective to agree that standard data layer for pre-qualification, and make sure that we remove the barriers to market entry. So as I said before, we recognise it is quite an onerous process for flexibility service providers, so that's sort of the feedback that we've had through previous consultations, that it sort of represents a barrier to providers. So we need to make sure that the work that we deliver removes that barrier. And that we've got full consideration of any complexity between different DNOs and those third-party market platforms, so that we can make sure that they can also be accommodated, any complexities can be accommodated, and that it can be adopted by DNOs and third-party platforms. So we will be seeking to recruit some stakeholders that can attend these workshops and provide input into these workshops in the new year. And we'll do that sort of through direct approaches, through sort of our known stakeholders that we engage with regularly. And we'll also be leveraging the existing stakeholder engagement forums that the ENA currently runs. So, forums just like this, and some of the other forums, such as Challenge Group, etc., to try and get some of those stakeholders that I'm sure have an opinion on this to come and help us and share their views. And then the next slide is just again around that sort of future governance that we're proposing after the work is complete in 2023. We want to make sure that there is ongoing governance around this sort of standardisation of pre-qualification, and throughout the course of 2023 we'll consult again with stakeholders to agree the best approach to take forward for this, so that at the end of 2023 we're able to give sort of a clear indication and publish how that will work moving forward after the close of 2023. So that's it from my update. Happy to take questions now. Avi, I'm not sure if you're doing questions now or a little later. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, any questions? Feel free to raise your hand.
We have one question raised in the chat here by Lisa Waters. I think the concern was around the timings, Helen. So the question is, would it take, and National Grid ESO has managed to do the DFS in about 2 months. Why is it that we're looking to agree some of the parameters across a year, is the question that she's raised.
Sorry, so this is the parameters for moving closer
Pre-qualification, I expect.
Real time.
Lisa, could you clarify that question, please?
Sorry, it's Lisa Waters. I just get so frustrated that this project is the slowest moving project on the planet. That you want to move closer to real time. You've been doing flexibility services. You must have learned something already. I can't understand how it's going to take all year to come up with a set of criteria that you're going to implement the following year. And in these, it's frustrating because by 2024, the type of storage you get or the recips that you see on the system or the DSR will have changed. It feels like the DNA is just like slow development of flexibility down rather than anything else. I don't understand what's taking so long. Is it just me?
I suppose that's a fair criticism, Lisa. I think we obviously strive to deliver outcomes as best as possible. I think it's important to realize that when we are doing this, it's all DNOs coming together. And as things stand, each DNOs are meant to be competing against each other. So when we are looking to standardize something, it has to happen with all the DNOs together. So if you're comparing with National Grid ESO, it's one organization setting out the rules and they're going away and doing it. But when it comes to the DSO and local flex market, we have all the DNOs coming together, with each of them having different risk appetite, different objectives, different local feedback from their flex service providers as well. So in terms of taking that on board and implementing it, harmoniously across, it's a bit more complicated than ESO. But having said that, I do concede that there's an opportunity for us to improve the impact we are going to be delivering to our stakeholders, which is going to be the key focus for 2023 as well. So I'll touch upon that later on in the slide, but that's my high level view. But I think for specific questions on the pre-qualification itself, I guess back to Helen Soden, if you have anything to add, Helen.
Yeah, I guess just to say, the pre-qualification work that's happening next year is separate to the steps towards real-time work that probably is more of is following a different timeline. But again, this doesn't prevent DNOs doing things individually, and I know some DNOs are planning on rolling out closer to real-time procurement in a sort of a shorter time scale. But as Avi said, it's more around alignment and making sure that we can do that consistently. But that shouldn't stop us doing things, you know, that comes out of innovation or is done through innovation or trialing things sooner. And DNOs certainly are. But yeah, again, I'm sure Avi will talk around some of those other topics later. Are there any other questions around this product?
Last opportunity. Any questions? If not, thank you so much, Helen. We will now move on to the primacy rules. So we have Matt Rivet from National Grid ESO and Matt Watson from National Grid Electricity Distribution, who are the co-leads on the technical working group here. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, morning everyone. So you've got both Matts this morning. So I'll kick off with the first sort of 4 or 5 slides, and I'll pass over to Matt Watson to pick up from there. So we're going to give you an update on where we are in the privacy product, which is obviously quite a big product for this year within Open Networks. There's been quite a lot of different moving parts, so we'll try and talk you through where we've got to, and obviously take any questions at the end. So we pop on to the next slide. Cool, thank you. So just for those that perhaps aren't so aware of this product, this is just a bit of an overview of how we've defined primacy, what we see as being, and effectively it's a level of management of service conflict between ESO needs and sort of DNO needs, or kind of DSO needs as they transition into that role. We've got a number of aims throughout the product this year, fundamentally, which are building on pieces of work that have happened previously throughout 2019 and before that, to actually try and tackle the challenge of primacy, which is one of many sort of dimensions, but also lots of complexity as well. So we've actively tried across the sort of the last 12 months to break the product down into manageable chunks, which hopefully will become a little bit clearer as we go through the slide pack. But where we want to try and get to is the development of clear sets of rules that can be implemented across the different sort of use cases that we'll take you through now. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Cool. So what we've done across the product is we've tried to break it down into different increments, and then within those increments we've got different use case pairs. So one of the first pieces of work that we did, which was taking some of our external engagement sessions to the focus group, for example, is we tried to break down all of the different conflicts that could potentially arise between ESO needs to manage the network and DNO needs to manage the sort of distribution side of things. And where we got to after going through this matrix, which kind of yielded potentially around the 2,000 different kind of use case pairs that could present themselves, we got to the point where we applied some scoring criteria, which was covered in our report that we published in April. And we've taken forward 2 key kind of outcomes from that as the first set of use cases. So for those that are aware of the regional development programs, new sort of constraint management service, or TCM, sometimes also referred to as the Megawatt Dispatch project for those that have been on our recent webinars, versus DNO flexibility services on different assets, crucially, but within effectively the same electrical area on the distribution network, could lead to a potential conflict scenario where effectively the ESO is looking to reduce generation, the DNO may be looking to increase generation or maintain a particular flow across a particular boundary on their network. So that's the first use case we're looking at. And one of the key reasons for choosing that one is we've got the ongoing delivery vehicle through the RDPs to actually implement some of the processes, systems and tools that we need to be able to deploy some of the rules across that use case. Another use case which came out quite highly is obviously the balancing mechanism, being the sort of primary market tool that the ESO has access to help manage the network for a variety of reasons. However, within the balancing mechanism, there are a number of different sort of sub-use cases where we might issue instructions to plants to actually manage different issues on the network. So for this first sort of appraisal of this particular use case, we've looked at constraint management, inertia management, and voltage management, which again are a sort of subset of actions that we would issue for kind of system-based reasons on the ESO side. And we're comparing that again to DNO flexibility services that may be in the opposite direction to those actions. And again, with all these initial use cases, they are on different assets. So you've got asset A looking to provide the ESO service, and you've got asset B looking to provide the DNO flexibility service. Moving on to increment 2, which Matt will pick up in a couple of slides' time, we've also been very conscious about the potential conflicts between the ESO service needs and DNO A&Ms. And again, these are on different assets. So this has come to light. You know, I've been personally aware of some scenarios internally where, you know, we could actively see these sorts of conflicts starting to arise on the network. And the example that we're using here is the short-term operating reserve service from the ESO. Obviously, this is being phased out, but it will be replaced by similar types of reserve services over the next sort of 12, 24 months. And obviously, we've got an existing penetration of DNO A&Ms, which are sort of growing across the country. So we felt this was quite an important use case to look at because it helps to tackle some of the challenges around automated control systems. So if we pop onto the next slide, we'll just go into a little bit more detail for this first set of use cases. So as I say, for increment 1, we've got 2 use cases that we're taking forward, and this is just a diagrammatic example, which hopefully gives some clarity over the scenario that we're looking to try and solve. So from an RDP perspective, we're looking to build this new transmission constraint management service, which is actively looking to manage export constraints in particular regional parts of the network. We've got lots of small DER that's looking to connect, which in some cases is displacing some of the larger balancing mechanism units. And within the distribution network, where these DER are located, you've obviously got the needs of the DNO in their procurement of the flexibility service. And like I say, in this instance, we've got the TCM megawatt turn down instruction, and you've got the DNO needs for potentially generation turn up or demand turn down. So you end up with a counteraction effect if both services were dispatched sort of at the same time. So there needs to be a level of primacy rule associated with that to help manage that conflict. So that's the first use case that we're looking at. And as I say, the delivery vehicle for this is our RDPs that are sort of moving their way forwards towards their first releases. So we pop onto the next slide. I'll just run through the second use case, which is, again, hopefully the diagram helps explain it a little bit. But in this case, we've taken the example of a sort of thermal import constraint. So you might have a flow from sort of right to left across the transmission system where you've got an active pull of power into a specific region. And again, the same could be true where you're trying to manage localized voltage problems, or you've got a national inertia requirement that you've got to maintain from an ESO perspective. And then on the distribution side, you've got kind of the opposite service that we talked about previously, which might be a generation turn down or demand sort of turn up type approach, where you've got the conflicts in different units in that particular geographical area. So again, in the bottom of the diagram, you can see there's a constraint that the DNO is looking to manage, and there's also a wider system need that the ESO is trying to manage as well. So this is where we've got the BM action side of things again versus DNO flexibility services. So that's use case 2 as part of this first increment. So if we pop on to the next slide, this is hopefully going to summarize where we've got to on the work for increment 1 so far. So one of the key things that is fairly obvious with the 2 use cases that we've just looked at are that obviously the DNOs are very geographically constrained in terms of the access to providers they have to solve some quite localized network challenges. So there are fewer alternatives that they can reach out to go elsewhere and basically get the service that they need. So in these particular use cases, the rule that we're sort of moving forward with is that the DNO has primacy, so is able to dispatch their service, and the ESO would have to source a solution elsewhere. What we would say is there are various layers to primacy, and we're starting to find that now as we explore some of the latter use cases. But our focus for this first step has been to try and keep things as simple as possible from a process, data sharing, and sort of overheads perspective, just to make sure we get it right. We get some learnings from those initial implementations of the rules, and then we can apply that to further use cases and these ones in the future to improve them. So what we've said is we use the simplified sharing of a risk of conflict report, which is a report sort of week ahead, and we'll look to improve that over time, that the DNO populates, provides the ESO, and that will give the ESO a view of which units remain available for dispatch and which units are not, based on the application of the rule that we've sort of just talked about. We'll then look to remove those sites from the relevant services to actively avoid that conflict scenario arising. And as I've said, we'll be looking to improve this over time to try and move that report close to real time, ensure the data exchange is much more frequent and close to real time as well, hopefully trying to automate some of that through the likes of web services and the new ICCP links that we're building between the ESO and various DNO parties. But on top of that, we've also identified the need to build out a more robust cost-benefit analysis, planning and investment timescale, which basically will look at data available to show a number of different things in terms of the likelihood of the conflict that could have occurred, the impact that the rules are having on the general availability of actions, etc., and comparing that to the availability of sort of build solutions or other options that remove the potential for conflict in the first place. So we're looking to try and build this alongside some of our current kind of annual processes from a network options assessment perspective, and the equivalent on the distribution side as well. So that work is actively moving forward as part of the product. And the idea of that really is to try and build a process whereby we're not reliant on these operational rules up to the point where we could back ourselves into potential corners, or the cost to consumers becoming too high to effectively mitigate this risk of conflict. We're triggering the right network investment signals far ahead of time, so that actually where it's right to do so, that risk of conflict is actually removed. So that's where we are with increment 1 in terms of the use cases that we're taking forward and the sort of conclusions that we've got to so far. It's been quite a busy product this year with lots of different kind of facets to it. So hopefully that makes sense. I think if we pop on to the next slide, that's probably going to go into Matt's overview of increment 2.
Yes, thanks, Matt. So as Matt River mentioned, we've kind of got a couple of increments running for the products. So we've got increment 1 that was been looking at those existing those services he went over, and where we've got a kind of a very clear view that the sort of rule is around DNO primacy. So effectively, DNO gets priority because there are limited other actions that they could take. In this second increment, which is running a little bit, behind that, the first one, we're then tackling this store versus A&M use case, which adds a certain layer of complexity. So just a reminder, effectively, we're looking at a store site behind a DNO A&M system. Effectively, if the ESO calls it to increment, if the wider A&M system is curtailing, then effectively, as the store generator ramps up, the A&M system will ramp back down, so you'll get minimal impact. Now, this is more complex if we go to the next slide than the previous use cases, because ultimately there are multiple options as to how you could mitigate this. So you could give the DNO primacy again, and we've kind of covered some of this. We've got a number of rules that cover this, but equally you could also give the ESO primacy by effectively holding additional headroom in A&M schemes. So it's a bit more complicated, and given the kind of complexity there, we've as part of the work, we've commissioned some consultants to help us do a robust sort CBA on this to really make sure that we're picking the right direction. So ultimately, wherever you go with the rules, there are impacts on providers. There are winners and there are losers, and so we're trying to conduct some robust analysis to make sure we kind of move in the right direction. I think we're looking to publish the results from the first round of the CBA imminently. And this is kind of where a number of this kind of comes from. But at a very high level, we've got a number of different rules. So we've kind of got these three broad categories of sort of different levels. And if I quickly run through them, so rule 1 effectively is quite similar to the rule we have for the previous increment, where effectively the DNO informs the ESO of where it has A&M systems, and then the ESO effectively removes providers from the store price stack where effectively there could be potential conflict. Rule 3 tweaks that a little bit, and effectively instead of us telling the ESO, we tell providers so they can manage their own portfolios, and this has the advantage of being able to manage aggregated portfolios. And then rule 4 just simply has the DNO informing the ESO where there might be curtailment, and the ESO over procuring, so acknowledging that some sites will be counteracted and procuring more. And with each of these, we have variants. So we have a kind of more static version where we do this in a relatively static basis. So it's kind of done on quite static data. So we'll tell the ESO which sites are within A&M systems. So obviously much simpler data to kind of provide, but the impact of then is effectively with the ESO is removing sites where that sort of any site that's within an A&M system at all. So quite a broad brush approach. And then you have the second version is sort of a more dynamic option where we provide the ESO with more granular forecasting of A&M needs. And effectively, the ESO only removes providers where there is a genuine risk of curtailment. So that kind of shrinks the potential zone of conflict, but obviously the sort of systems needed to implement that are larger. So we've got those rules. We also have rules for the ESO primacy. So this is effectively where the ESO would tell the DNOs where it has store providers, and the DNO would then look to hold additional headroom in A&M systems. And again, there's a static and dynamic version depending on whether you just take all store providers or those that have genuinely got contracts from the ESO from the day ahead auctions. And then we've got a few kind of more sort of potentially long-term options through Rule 6 and 7, where there's a more kind of a financial kind of sort of a greater view of the financials associated with this, where effectively the ESO or the price of kind of of counteraction, so either of holding additional headroom or would be fed into the ESO's price stack. So effectively, if we acknowledge we're going to have to hold additional headroom, that would be passed across to the ESO. And the two options are whether that's passed across directly or through store providers. So we have this vast array of different rules, and we're currently working through a CBA to try and understand, or we've gone through an initial piece to understand which is best. And in that CBA, there's lots of kind of work we've done around sort of different scenarios. With all this, we're trying to understand different costs to different providers. Ultimately, we've been given strong direction from Ofgem to really try and look at what provides the best kind of lowest cost for sort of the end consumer, but ultimately we do also need to understand sort of how the different costs may flow. So obviously in sort of where the DNO has primacy, so rules 1 and 3, the sort of people who are losing out are store providers who no longer have access to store markets, and in sort of rule 2 where the ESO has primacy, then the losers are sort of generators with A&M connections, as effectively the level of curtailment would have to increase. So if we jump to the next slide, so we've run some initial analysis and kind of through an initial CBA analysis. With all of them, the scenario, the kind of rule that's coming out as the most efficient at the moment is a rule 2B, so where effectively the DNOs dynamically hold headroom for store providers, but there's a fair amount of further work we're looking to kick off. So there's a kind of, from that initial piece, I think it was really useful to kind of work through, but there are a number of limitations in terms of the analysis and kind of elements that needed to be kind of fed in. And so was going to look through these, and then we are kind of proposing to do some follow-up work. So the first bit, obviously, with all the CBAs, we kind of need to be clear about what it is and isn't covering. So at the moment, it's purely looking at the cost of mitigating the conflict. It doesn't look at the benefits associated. So all the results are negative. It's about saying, which is effectively has the lowest cost. It doesn't talk about the benefits. That's something we're looking to add into the analysis going forward. It only considers a single year. It only considers a single service. So as Matt mentioned, we're looking at the store. We know that that's being phased out. But it was based on what we had data for. There's some apportioning rules around capital costs. But the biggest piece from this initial analysis was dependency on how the store market works, particularly on how availability is currently set for store providers. And this was seen as a very large sensitivity on the analysis. So because it's a pay-as-clear auction and availability is carried out on a daily basis, then effectively, if we have for where the DNO gets primacy, if we have a single half hour of potential curtailment in a day, then it effectively removes the provider from the store market for the full 24 hours. And it also, if they are any of the margin generators, it potentially kind of impacts the pricing for all generators because it's a pay-as-clear mechanic. So there's a real kind of large sensitivity to that specific rule. And we know that this is a rule that's being reviewed for the new reserve products the ESO is picking up. So it felt like a pretty sensible thing going forward to really kind of understand just how sensitive that is and whether any of the analysis changes off the back of that. So if we jump to the next slide, which I think is my last, this is just kind of picks up some of the analysis we're carrying forward. So effectively, we've done the first round of analysis. We're now kind of shaping up the next round to try and kind of plug a few of the holes and make sure we're kind of really confident in the results. So the first is looking at much shorter store availability windows. So we're going down to 2 hours, as that's been something that's been mooted as a possibility for the new reserve products. We are going to be quantifying the counterfactuals to make sure that we understand the value of doing this. So, we're suggesting a number of rules to mitigate conflicts. Is it actually worth implementing that is a really key question, and potentially the more question is, when is it worth doing that? At what level of conflict is it worth doing so? We're going to do a bit of a review just to make sure there's no rules we've omitted. And I know that there's a few tweaks that DNV are interested in looking at. So DNV who are supporting the analysis to kind of some of those rules. We're going to be doing some formal sensitivity analysis again, just to make sure that we're not sat on any kind of knife edges for results. Because again, the impact of this does have, the outcomes of this does have an impact on providers. We need to make sure we the analysis is robust. We're going to do a bit of work on the modelling of A&M. So for the first round, we effectively modelled A&M systems as a single unit. So effectively, if one of A&M system is curtailing, all A&M systems are curtailing. This was done just because of sort of data limitations and to try and keep the analysis moving. One thing that does do is it creates or removes any sort of diversity between A&M systems, potentially overemphasizing the potential costs of the ESO. So we're going to be adjusting that. And we're also doing some work to try and make the CBA sort of more accessible so we can share it and run it ourselves. So there's a fair amount of work going forward on this. And ultimately, we'll be looking to kind of publish the outcomes of this so that people are really clear where this is going. This is a particularly interesting use case. Wherever the rules land, there will be impacts on providers and different providers depending on the rules. So yeah, we're kind of pushing forward and keen for people to be aware of what changes are coming, what we're looking at, make sure that people are comfortable with the analysis, that they can kind of feed in any sort of challenges along the way so that when we come to making a decision, we are doing off the best of information. So I think that covers all that I wanted to cover there. So I guess, yeah, it's an opportunity for questions.
I do not have any questions on chat. So if anybody has a question or would like to discuss, please step in.
And they went to the wrong office. Pilot, that's called.
I see David has hand up. David, please jump in.
So the Kenko thing really didn't
Hi, David McClellan from the Energy Innovation Centre. I'm just interested in that point about granularity of A&M, and you said the restriction was on the data. A&M's been in operation for quite a number of years now, as everybody knows. So presumably there's a lot of historic data which all the DNOs and service providers will have that'll allow you to do that analysis in quite a bit of detail and understand the limitations and any unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, so on that, I potentially, simplify. So I think there is the challenge is probably less on data, more just on scale and scale of the analysis. So obviously one of the challenges is that every single A&M has its own, and even within A&M systems, you can have multiple constraints you're kind of managing, each with their own curtailment profile, which is dependent on the sort of generator mix that you have. So depending on where you are now and what generators will connect in future, then kind of doing curtailment profiles is difficult. So I think the general piece was ultimately we weren't in a position where we'd be able to model every single A&M system individually. Just the scale would be too large to kind of do any sort of sensible analysis. We'd still be running this for the next however long to kind of to get an answer. So we picked an initial piece based on some work that we'd done in a previous innovation project about how to model it. Again, this was kind of a first pass. I think we are going to move forward and add a little bit more granularity. We're not going to go down to individual A&M system level because again, it's just the scale of the tasks. We could spend an awful lot of time there, and there is so much uncertainty in these things because levels of curtailment are dependent on such very specific conditions that they become quite difficult. So working out the level of curtailment that you'll see over the next coming set of years on an individual A&M system is a notoriously difficult task. But yeah, I hope that kind of gives a bit of context as to why we kind of landed where we landed on that.
Yeah, my second point was the potential for unintended consequences and the opportunity for people to game it by creating constraints and being rewarded for taking care of those constraints elsewhere. So that's my second point, is really how do you gain confidence that you're not going to allow unintended consequences or open it up to that gamification?
So I think as we're going through, we are looking through a number of the kind of impacts of these rules. Obviously, unintended consequences are by definition unintended. So I think we're picking up what we can. We are also, as we're going through these use cases, looking to engage with as many people as possible. So one of the bits that I would really push is that we have a focus group for primacy, and if you're interested in the detail, please do come along to that. And I think that would be the kind of one of the main bits, is to kind of make sure people are kind of highlighting the potential for these consequences. So yeah, we'll do what we can to try and kind of pick them up, but very keen if people can see specific issues, challenges with what we're doing, then please feed them back so we can feed back to us so we can kind of pick those up. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay, looks like there are not any questions. If there are any, feel free to reach out to Open Networks and we'll forward them to the leads for response and deliberation anyhow. So thank you so much, Matt and Matt, for coming along. And I think now it's time for a quick break. I am looking at, I think we will try to keep back to our schedule. So we will look to come back in at 11:05 if that's okay. So yeah, see you all in 7 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a quick but efficient break. So now we are going to be kicking off with our discussion on workstream 2. I see Jim here. Over to you, Jim.
Hi there, Avi. Morning, everybody. Good to see you or be with you this morning. I work at Northern Power Grid, but I also chair this stream of our Open Networks project. So we're just going to sort of just give you a quick update on what's going on, and then going to hand over to Richard Woodward from National Grid, who will take us on to talk a little bit further detail on one of the products that we've been working on. So as you can see from the slide here, these are the main areas. I'll focus on the sort of diagram there in the bottom right hand corner that you can see. So the first one of these is the embedded capacity register, which is an area where we've been working on expanding the amount of data that's available to people on what flexible resources are fitted on the distribution networks that can help with flexibility. So that's in the information sharing category. And what we've been doing here is working on a code mod that's been going through Dicusa to bring that threshold down of those assets from 1 megawatt down to 50 kilowatts or 50 kilowatts and above, as you can read on the slide as well. So that's the sort of key priority that's been going on. And on that one, on that product, we've got hopefully an Ofgem approval of that change that's going through, such that in Q1 of next year, you'll start to see more data available from that. So rather than 1 megawatt threshold down to 50 kilowatts. So we've been getting ready for that as distribution network operators in what we've been doing there. The second activity that's going on in there is been about how we can, I suppose, take forward the way that we share that data, because at the moment it's quite basic in terms of we as individual network companies, we put that information on our websites and make that available to people. But we've been working as we're increasingly opening up with data sharing platforms as companies. We've been working out how we can do that to provide machine to machine kind of interfaces and data extracts and those kind of things. And so we'll be sharing some information on that fairly soon, but there's some good work going on there across a number of network companies on how we're doing that, where we're looking to bring that functionality forward so that people have got that availability as well. So I guess look out for more information on that. So I think that's probably it for the rest of the slide. There's not a lot more to say on interactivity at the moment. Mainly the work's been going on in queue management, and I think unless you've got anything else in your locker there, Avi, in terms of the slides you're sharing, you haven't. I haven't forgotten something that's going on. So I'm going to hand over to Richard, and Richard will take us away to talk a bit about what we're doing in queue management. So over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And hello to everyone. Some familiar names, which is good, but for those who don't know me, I work for National Grid TO, policy and code lead for us, and I'm the product group lead for the queue management P2 group here. So I've got a bit of a summary that tries to debunk some of the myths, or at least tries to elaborate on what queue management actually is, and then give you details of 2 bits of progress. One on the open network side of work we've been doing this year and stuff that's due to come. And also kind of hot off the press, as it were, latest information about the code change for queue management, which has been kicked off by the ESO under the CUSC. So Avi, if you can skip to next slide for me. So what is queue management? Essentially the commercial arrangements available to network companies that enable us to manage connections, queues. This is with a view to make sure that capacity that's allocated to customers is fully utilised and isn't hoarded, but also from our perspective ensures that we're not making investment uneconomically or inefficiently, or that investment becomes stranded at a point in the future. And from a developer perspective, we want the queue to be moving, and we want to promote effective competition. We want to make sure that the viable projects are the ones that get connected, and I'm sure all of us can appreciate that at the moment the arrangements don't necessarily facilitate that particularly well. So the things that we've been looking at in open networks and a queue management policy is being development here for many years. The code mod that under CMP 376 is actually the beginning of the end, as it were, for queue management policy development. But we're looking at having consistent milestones, the points in the connections journey, where we want to agree with developers appropriate timescales to deliver these activities, be they land rights, planning consents, or getting commercial investment decisions. The ability to give early warning where there may be problems and give developers time to rectify those. But in the event that projects can't be got back on course, we think it's appropriate that there are clear consequences for projects that are unable, for whatever reason, to continue, and that ultimately means that connection agreements get terminated, and that ensures that the viable projects that we're talking about get to the front of the queue and get connected as quickly as possible. So Workstream 2, Product 2 being responsible for developing and certainly a distribution implementing this whole system queue management approach. If you can skip on to the next one for me, Avi. So here's the timeline of what we've been doing. So as I mentioned, it's the beginning of the end. So July 2021, the policy guidance or user guides that was published, which represents all the information that the network companies believe is appropriate to share with industry as to how that queue management policy should be applied. And DNOs have begun to implement that guidance immediately, particularly clarifying which projects it's appropriate to apply it to, certainly from their customer base, the larger end of the scale. And around that time as well, NG ESO raised their code change to enable us to implement queue management guidance as policy at transmission. It's worth noting that the DCUSA and the CUSC are very different. The amount of detail that it's exhaustively set out for contracts is much more significant in the CUSC, and therefore that's why there's a code change there and not under DCUSA. And after the work groups were kicked off in autumn, there was definitely some industry feedback from our transmission customers that the ENA guidance wasn't fit for purpose for particularly more complicated projects, and therefore the mod was paused for a while at the beginning of this year, just to recalibrate and to get that policy easier to apply to transmission projects, particularly those with complicated planning regimes and challenges around that. A year on from our implementation, we reconvened our meetings to try to ascertain how the policy had landed at DNO level, and agreed with the Open Network Steering Group that it was appropriate to communicate with industry that the policy or the guidance has had an effect and a positive impact. So through the last few months, we've been compiling that data, and I'm not able to share that today, but we will share that in the next week or so. But I can at least show you what the information will be and will be shared. And we've been compiling that information, sharing best practice as much as we can, but ensuring a consistency of application and dealing with issues as and when they arise from experience of living with this queue management guidance. The modification resumed in the autumn, and as of the last few weeks, in fact, has gone out for consultation. The first round of consultation, there will be a secondary one once the work group has concluded its business, and that will be in the probably the end of Q1, beginning of Q2 next year if we stay on track. But right now there is an open consultation on the proposal to apply queue management, how to apply queue management for transmission customers under the CUSC. So I definitely flag that for your attention and welcome all kinds of responses, whether you're in that work group or not. Hopefully the document itself is easy to follow so you can provide a response. Next slide, Abby. So yeah, so let's probably skip on to the next slide, if that's all right. This is the tracker that we propose to share with industry. It's quite a busy slide, but let me talk you through it. It's obviously important for us to be able to identify the number of customer contracts which have had queue management concepts applied to them at distribution, and it's important for us to understand of the portfolio of customers who are complying with the milestones, which customers are not complying, and are there any reasons behind that. And our early reporting, and it's a challenge that I'm very much aware of, and if anything, strengthens the need for queue management at transmission. A lot of the customers at distribution are finding challenges getting early connection states because of upstream transmission work, and so we'll be able to share data that illuminates that issue a little bit more. But some customers will be in the tolerance, i.e. They are in this kind of acceptable rectification period, but at some point we'll get into the red, and therefore, whilst we've only got a year's worth of data, there's not a huge amount of information for customers in the red. But we want to understand where customers have had their agreements terminated and the capacity that has been freed up and associated with that termination that can be then given or offered out to other customers further back in the queue to enable their projects to proceed. We also want to understand whether customers have preemptively taken action to cancel their own agreements in anticipation of a breach of queue management, because I think that's just as much an importance as us enforcing it too. The signals are there, and that's what we want to report on as well. So that's the tracker there, and we will work with Avi and the folks at the ENA to publish that information so it's available to you. We just need to get Open Network Steering Group's sight of it first, but hopefully you'll accept that being able to report on this, it's early progress, there's not masses of data there, is nevertheless quite a transparent and open thing to do, and we'll be looking to continue that one way or the other under Open Networks in the new year as well. Avi, next slide. So next steps, as I mentioned, we're just closing out the final data gaps, particularly around capacity that's been freed up. Share with you guys today, and then there's an Open Network Steering Group meeting later this week where we'll figure out the strategy to publish that information and provide ongoing updates. Just a couple more bits from me on the CUSC mod. CMP 376, as I mentioned, is out for consultation. Next one, please, Abby. So this was raised last year and has been worked on in various stages this year. And again, we're inheriting a lot of the good work done at product 2. You know, we've got the consistent whole system milestone categories that the ENA guidance and the DNOs are applying. We're ensuring that developers take the same responsibility to ensure and evidence their own ongoing compliance to those milestones. We've got the concept of rectification periods, albeit they're not as extensive or accumulate as they do at distribution. And we're being consistent that termination is the ultimate outcome where compliance can't be achieved. We have, however, evolved, the ESO has evolved the policy to ensure better application at transmission. If you can skip to the next slide, I'll clarify which bits those are. So the concept of tolerance periods and the fact that the tolerance periods can accumulate over time and have batched up it has been removed. That was confusing to transmission colleagues. And well, there was a point where we had knife edge compliance, which I think was felt to be a little bit penal. So we've now added the concept of notice periods, both preemptively and a period for rectification and evidence review after dates as well. So not the same concept, slightly adjusted at transmission. There was also concerns, as I mentioned, around planning, particularly around seasonality for those of you developing projects offshore as well. A lot of issues with being able to get the data that you need at the right time, and the milestone was quite tight on that front. So we've now extended planning milestones and accommodated a little bit more of seasonality and issues outside the developer's control as well, particularly when we're aware that it's a third party that's involved in awarding that planning and processing it, and that's not necessarily in the developer's control. There was a change, although I'm not necessarily supportive of it myself, where the offer date was the reference for compliance, and we're now focusing developers focus on the end of the process. So all the milestones at transmission, and I believe the DNO colleagues are considering that change to their own guidance as well, but they reference the end point rather than the start. I'm a little bit more skeptical as to whether that's a good thing or not, but it's subject to feedback, and therefore we've worked hard to incorporate it. And there was also some tiering of the duration of milestones based on connection voltage, which I think we agreed felt quite arbitrary. So we've now tiered the milestones based on the project lead time or the duration out into the future for which the customer's connection date is. And that focuses the attention, particularly for shorter lead time, which I know is quite unique at the moment. But we want people to progress their projects as swiftly as possible. Whereas if it's further in the future, projects subject to DCOs, for example, the milestones are a little bit more relaxed. Next slide, please, Abby. So the next steps for the code mod, as I mentioned, out for consultation right now via the ESO code administrator. I'm very happy to share the link. I don't think I have done through the slides if people want to do that, but 23rd of December is the deadline for those responses. The workgroup then reconvened the new year to consider responses, particularly those that require urgent adjustment to the ESO's proposal or the consideration of other proposals as alternatives, which might have come through the consultation process. I've already set out a position on behalf of NGET where we believe implementation needs to capture new and existing users as soon as possible. And we're working to figure out what that looks like. There's a lot of concerns that, particularly from my colleagues in CUSC, that this might appear to be retrospectivity, which we don't believe it is, but we need to work with industry and Ofgem potentially just to figure out how we navigate that one to make sure we don't do things retrospectively and we do things in a fair and transparent manner. And then as the code administrator timetable for CMP 376 sets out, we hope to present a decision to Ofgem in the new year in April time, and this coincides with the recently announced adjustment to the deadline for the tech amnesty, transmission entry capacity amnesty, which is the ESO's arrangement with the onshore TOs to offer low cost terminations or cancellations for customers who wish to exit the connections queue, and under current arrangements would have faced quite a high cost to do that. So working to try to clear out the queue as much as possible such that we have a better situation when the queue management, fingers crossed, is approved by Ofgem and is applied. So I've whistled through that really quickly. I've spoken very quickly, I'm aware as well. So I'm very happy to pause, slow things down and take any questions. And I'm sure Jim is as well on any of the PT matters. Anything in the chat, Avi? I think there was a question about slides.
No, I'll be sharing the slides as soon as the session's complete, so that's taken care of. But there are no other questions. There is one. I think I can see Lisa. Something, please.
Thanks for that. It's just a quick question, and I'm sure it has been considered. I just wasn't at the right meeting. Have we looked at, instead of trying to manage the queue once you're in the queue, trying to limit people getting in the queue, for example, by having to prove that you've got land rights prior to applying for a connection?
So one of the other potential whackums that I'm considering is around land rights and that particular milestone. So that hasn't come up in the work group discussion. We get mixed feedback, I'll be honest, on whether land rights, preemptive land rights is appropriate. Some developers support it, some don't. I think that's something we see merit for under the queue management modification, but you'll be aware, and I think it partially clashes with our meeting right now, that ESO are doing announcements around wider connections reform, and I believe the filter at the start of the process is part of the scope of that reform, though what that looks like, I don't know. So I'm pretty certain that NGET will take a position in CMP 376 around land rights, probably separately from the ESO. So that might address your point, Lisa, but the wider reform I would hope would look into how people get in the queue in the first place as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's useful. I get quite a lot of people complaining to me that they do have land rights and they discover that somebody else has got a connection on associated with the land. And I think it would bring it somewhat more in line with things like the capacity market. Yeah, we're very alive to those issues, particularly in England and Wales, where we have a lot of customers applying with preemptive assumptions that land that they want will be there, but they are competing with another customer who's also applied to the same bit of land. So it's a real live issue that we've got in our patch, and I'm sure there's some frustration with developers who've got similar access themselves and then see other people applying in adjacent parts of the network. So that's something we're alive to. We'll do what we can through CMP 376, but it's a live issue for the connections reform as well, which will hopefully kick off in the new year as well. Thanks.
Doesn't look like there are any other questions. So I guess thanks, Richard. Thanks, Jim.
I will stick the link to the ESO consultation for queue management in the chat,
Yes,
if that's okay, Avi. So I'll turn my camera off, do that, and then I will disappear. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Richard. I think next we have Steve, who is the chair for the workstream 3. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see so many people on this morning. Yeah, just to give an overview of workstream 3. If we go to the next slide, Abby. So most of you will know workstream 3 has been part of Open Networks right from the outset of the programme. The idea has been to fulfil a sort of overarching role to progress the development and implementation of the least regrets pathway to distribution system operation in line with policy across the programme, and that's been around also making sure that we identify and address potential conflicts of interest and unintended consequences as we go through that process in conjunction with stakeholders, taking on board feedback from the advisory group during that period. It's also been a sort of forum for discussion on key DSO related outcomes, including sort of upcoming policy positions from BEIS or Ofgem, and considering how the DSO related outcomes are taken forward by the various work streams in Open Networks. So it's been a hub really to kind of take on board those positions and then review where they best sat within the programme. And just recently, that's consisted of two projects, the DSO implementation plan and managing conflicts of interest with the conflicts of interest and unintended consequences register that's been in place, almost from the start of Open Networks. And recently it's been focused on kind of monitoring the impacts of the DSO transition on internal and external stakeholders by updating that register and focusing on the roadmap as well. So it's had that kind of overarching view of Open Networks and how the perception of DSO has changed within the UK as well. So as you're probably well aware, when we started, there was lots of talk about distribution system operator, and that's gradually evolved into this view that it's more a basket of functions that are performed by DNOs under the distribution system operation definition. If we go to the next slide, so focusing on the first product and how that's kind of evolved over the years. In 2017, Workstream 3 was instrumental in kind of thinking about the foundations for future worlds. We spent quite a bit of time focused on a definition for DSO, what that actually meant in the UK and in the UK industry. And then off the back of that, what were the kind of functions that made up this DSO entity? And we determined there was eight key functions that performed that role, from kind of market development side right the way through to the network operations side and dispatch. Most of them were focused around flexibility and whole system, and particularly because Open Networks had kind of come out of the transmission distribution interface steering group. There was a lot of focus on coordination between the DNOs and ESO. We also looked at the principle of neutral market facilitation. We knew right from the outset that if DNOs were operating in this space, we had to be neutral facilitators of the market. We shouldn't distort that market, so we had to allow it without distorting it, as I said, and also looking at some of the commercial principles that would underpin that in terms of how we interacted with distributed energy resources in the market, and how we interacted with the ESO and other players in that kind of whole system space. We then commissioned a consultant to work with us on some detailed SCAM modelling that modelled 5 different future worlds with different attributions of roles and responsibilities for DSO function. There was quite widespread stakeholder engagement with that and involvement in that process that came out with these range of worlds as to how DSO might operate in this kind of unique UK environment. And it looked at the pathways between those actors, as we call them, and how that might work. Off the back of that SCAN modelling, we then decided to take those forward and look at an impact assessment which assessed each of those worlds to support the kind of the least regrets approach. And off the back of that impact assessment and pathways, we decided that World B probably was the least regrets pathway, which was joint coordination between DNOs and the ESO. And then in 2020, we then started the DSO implementation plan to show how, off the back of the 8 functions that I mentioned earlier, how we were progressing in terms of implementing the functions, the capability that was needed, and the systems to support those 8 functions. And we've been reviewing that over time and updating that. And one of the things that we've done as part of that is reflect the changes in that basket of functions by from the policy decisions from Ofgem. So as Ofgem has moved to the baseline expectations and the 3 core functions of planning and network development, market development, and network operation, we've started to reflect that in our thinking as well. And to be honest, it's been really positive to see, as we've got more granularity from Ofgem going towards ED2 and understood in what they're looking for. I think we feel validated in terms of some of the work that we've done, and certainly what we see in those baseline expectations when they came out, it wasn't anything that we didn't expect. It reflected the work that had been done over that period of time, and certainly gave us a clear definition of what's needed. So from 2023 onwards, we feel that there isn't a need for the DSO implementation plan to be updated going forward, and the reason for that is because the ED2 has got some really clear parameters on what's needed in the DSO function. As you're aware, Ofgem have put a possible reopener during ED2 if we don't, if we're not performing those roles, to separate that out. And those parameters are measured as well. So there's a clear DSO ODI and incentive that will reward or penalise us according to performance on that on those functions, and that will consist of a stakeholder survey, a performance panel, outturn performance metrics, and regularly reported evidence. So that set of metrics will give clear visibility on how the individual DNOs are performing against those Ofgem baseline expectations, and you'll be able to see quite clearly who's ahead of the game or who's lagging. So in that respect, the DSO implementation plan is going to come to an end. Our plans are to update the implementation plan at the end of this year to reflect the new branding for WPD and our kind of the DNO's end of year position, and that will still be available on the web going forward. But our feeling is that the ED2 incentive for DSO will be the vehicle for measuring DNO's progress in this area. If I if I go to our next product, which is the conflicts of interest and unintended consequence register. This, as I said, this is part of the kind of wider ENA Open Networks program and the bringer activity on Open Networks Future Worlds in 2018. And we scoped out this conflicts of interest and unintended consequences register with Open Networks and stakeholders in a workshop initially in December of that year. And there were 6 themes identified. So distributional customer impacts, risk of regret, operational viability, system security, system operator conflicts, and market power and gaming. So, fairly comprehensive view of, what could stand in the way of DSO operating efficiently and effectively and in a neutral manner. In 2019, we scoped it out as a standalone product, and we included conflicts of interest and unintended consequences of the transition to DSO, but not risks to the DSO model or operations. And the idea was to explore risks and focus on mitigation measures. So the output was a spreadsheet that acted as a risk log and tracker, and with recommendations for work going forward. And the idea was to give transparency for stakeholders, give and better informed decisions on the design of DSO. And we shared that with the advisory group in the autumn of 2019, and we've been doing that on a regular basis ever since. During periods, it's grown to quite an unwieldy document, and to be fair, we've probably been a little bit disappointed with how often it's used in terms of when we kind of track hits to that area, and that may be our fault in making it so detailed. So we go to the next slide. So what we've tried to do is to reduce some of that and make it clearer and fresher. So in 2020 we introduced heat maps, stakeholder engagement on it, and the mitigation actions. In 2021 we consulted with a refresher webinar and did some external comms, and engaged the ENA's customer and social issues group to monitor and advise on some of the vulnerable customer impacts, and linked it more explicitly with some of the DSO implementation plans. We also decided to separate systemic risks from more actionable risks, so that they fitted on one page. And what that was trying to do was to take out some of the issues that we always need to be mindful of. So it's no good really having a risk that says DNOs have to be neutral. We know that, and it's not something, it's something we always have to be mindful of. It has to be part of our core being, if you like, but it's not something you're actually going to action on a month-by-month basis. In terms of it's not going to change. It's always going to be there. So those systemic risks were taken out. And then this year, what we've done is scrub some of the old superseded activities, and we've split out the risks that are going to be monitored centrally by Open Networks, and those that will be monitored by individual network companies from next year onwards, based on the DSO incentive, which you'll have visibility of. And the idea behind that is to, again, to make it easier to view, and in effect, because the DSO implementation plan is going to finish, and this would mean this is the only product left in workstream 3. Workstream 3 will come to an end, and the conflicts of interest and unintended consequences risk register will be taken on by the steering group going forward. So it'll be part of its core input as Open Networks progresses and goes forward. So in summary, The DSO implementation plan will still be available on the web, but as I said, that will be taken over by the DSO incentive, and the conflicts of interest and unintended consequences risk register will be transferred to the steering group and become one of their inputs. And DSO transition will terminate at the end of this year, and that's only right and proper in the sense that DSO becomes business as usual from April next year under ED2. So the transition part is done, our work is done here, and we move on to actually seeing it as business as usual and being assessed on how we deliver it, which is only right and proper. Any questions? Hi, Helen, I see your hand.
Hi. So when will the new format be shared? When will the new conflict of interest format be shared?
Shall I take the question, Steve?
Yeah.
Helen, we are currently reviewing that with the steering group this week, and in the updated register, we have flagged the entries that will be taken forward with open networks, and which of them will be via the individual DNOs, so that the existing register as is can be seen by the stakeholder with the clear preference of how it will be taken forward in the future. And come 2023, we will look to have these updates annually within the open networks with the sort of condensed list, which is going to be tracked only within open networks. At that time, the entries which are to be tracked by DNOs will be removed from the list as you would see it in December in the next couple of weeks.
So I think it's a little concerning that DSO neutrality has been taken out, but obviously I've not seen the new format, so I can't. It's hard to say how that's been dealt with.
Sorry, Helen, that was just an example off the top of my head. It wasn't, it wasn't meant to be specific. It was around, it was saying that it's just been separated out. So concepts that are principles on which DSO should always be based and are reflected in the baseline expectations by Ofgem will always be in there. But they're not things that you sort of action week by week, in the sense that we don't have to review it because we know it needs to actually, be enshrined in stone, as it were.
And I guess finally, hopefully it can be placed somewhere that's easy to find, because one of the reasons why I've not looked at it on a regular basis is that it's not that easy to find and work with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's good. That's noted, Helen. Thank you so much for the feedback.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, thoughts on workstream 3? I don't have any questions on the chat as well, Steve, so I think thank you so much.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Moving on then, a quick program update from my side. I think this year has been quite an interesting ton of events from the Open Networks program as a whole. We've taken the opportunity to reflect on the program and what we are doing right and wrong. I suppose when we kicked off in 2017, the ambition we set out with a clear view of setting up local flex market, and at the time it was at a nascent stage. Now, having spent 5 years in with a world-leading local flex market, I think the challenges and the priorities are slightly different. So we are cognizant of the fact, and we obviously brought in the stakeholders to the center of the program with the challenge group this year, which has been, in my personal view and from what feedback I've received on the challenge group, a huge success. So we've had the opportunity to reflect on all the things that we are doing. So we clearly see a need for the program to evolve as a whole. And when I say evolve, it means in terms of our focus, the way we approach things, and some of the constructive criticism we've received in terms of our pace and the way we deliver outcomes. So all those things are something that we've taken head on and not try to brush it under the carpet. So we're looking to overhaul the program such that it delivers the key impact that we are capable of delivering with all the 200 odd subject matter experts who come in to deliver this piece of work that we tend to focus on over the years. So in that space, then we are looking to change not only the structure of the program, we're also looking to change elements of governance. So I think we have received good positive feedback on this forum as well, dissemination forum, or the insights forum as we like to call it. So I think going forward, we would like to keep this session. However, I think there's an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the feedback that you have, if you have thought of something to way to improve it or something that didn't work well. In the past, we've had multiple Slidos to check whether you are happy with the level of detail and the breadth of content we've provided. We've typically had a positive response to that. I've not included a repeat Slido poll for the same question, but I am keen to hear from participants here or across the forum in general to see if they have thought of any areas of improvement they'd like to seek. We continue to work with our comms team because we have a sister program called Gas Go Screen as well. And together we want to ensure that the stakeholder engagement is consistent and is accessible to all. So we're kind of engaging through that channel as well to take out some of the best practices. So come 2023, when we launch the new program in its new shape, along with the new Insights Forum as well next year, I think we will look to incorporate some of those, hopefully minor tweaks, but that'll improve the user experience in general. So that's from a very this forum specific. But coming back to the program, I think I'm quite delighted to to note that we are looking to overhaul the program, match with the current change in the landscape in terms of policy and all the stakeholder feedback, and improving outcomes versus the outputs, and just make it more accessible, like some of the points that Helen mentioned in terms of our website. Because if we are going to be making this program accessible to the stakeholders and such a way that they are able to get the key benefits that we're trying to drive, I think there's a need for the steps that we are taking. But it is probably an incremental one, because if you're overhauling a website, it's not something you can do in a couple of days. So we have noted the feedback, obviously. So we will look to incorporate those things and come out with a fresh face in 2023. So just to summarize here in the slide, I think the evolution of home networks has been a key part of, I think, good 6 odd months now, and we're at a stage towards the final leg wherein we're trying to consolidate the work that we intend to be doing next year, along with the key measurable and visible outcomes, as opposed to just telling you that we published, say, A or B report. So that's something that we are looking to change as well. But also having completed the 2022 year, which has been quite ambitious in terms of the work we are doing as well. So we're looking to publish an end of year report, which is a quick summary of all the things that we have done. So if you are on our newsletter, you'll find a link to that as soon as it's published. I think it's going to be live end of this week. And obviously the big ticket item is the launch of 2023. So within this is the launch document, we're trying to make sure that the purpose and the outcome we're trying to drive the program is clear. So we'll be looking to publish this in Jan, along with the links to the Flex consultation feedback that we've received and the responses that the technical working groups have put together. So we are embodying them all together such that if any person were to access this document, they'll have a clear view of all the things that they need to understand the program and why we did what we're doing. So I think this is the reason we've clubbed them together, because in the past we've typically published the Flex consultation response separately. But one of the feedback we received is that if there are 5-6 documents that sit out there which kind of are essential to bring the whole message through, it probably best if it's linked in one document, and people who are interested can then go dwell into the details as they're interested, as opposed to having them in 5 different places on the website. So you can look forward to this being published in early Jan, and you can probably look to hear some of the new structures of the program as well. I guess some of which, like Steve and Jim mentioned. So we are terminating our work stream 3 as in the existing shape. But just to note that the work itself, the whole DSO, the system operation, is something that's going to be embedded within the program as such. And also a great news is that we are trying to consolidate a lot of work doing within ENA, within a new strategic connections group within ENA. So in the past, Open Networks has dwelt in some of the aspects of connections, specifically queue management, like Richard presented this morning. But then there are much broader discussions, and instead of having everybody work in silos, and since this is a topic that is essential for all us to address, so it is decided that it's probably best if we bring it all together such that the impact is maximized, as opposed to being be a bit of a piecemeal done by different parties across. So that's something you can look forward to as well. So a lot of change coming up, and hopefully constructive ones. But having said that, we're always open to feedback, both positive and negative for that matter. So please feel free to reach out to us with any of your thoughts, views, or any suggestions of improvement. But those are the quick highlights from the program as of today from my side. Again, I'll pause here and take on some questions or thoughts if anybody has them. I don't see any hands. I have not received any questions on the chat as well. So I will then open up the floor to any other business. If anybody has any, please jump in and we can discuss that as well. I don't see anybody's hand. In that case, I have left a few links here. I'll obviously have the slides published and the link circulated with the attendees here soon. So thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time out and to join us in this forum this morning. And as you might know, this is the final one for the year 2022. Look forward to your participation and engagement in 2023 as well. Thank you so much, everyone.